Evolutionary Underground episode 48 is coming your way. We have a fun one coming for you. Monster is going to be here and he's going to drop the hammer down on this topic. It's going to be a very important one. It's overthinking your training, why and how, examples with Geneza Pharma. We've got really good information coming. We're going to talk about does training need to be complicated, how to structure a workout on or off cycle. We're going to give you a thread example of possible overthinking. It was on a Halo thread. We're going to talk about products to enhance your training with Geneza Pharma. We're going to talk about why Geneza Pharma is recommended. But first, let me remind everybody, please go on Apple and Spotify. We're on there now. You can listen to us, of course, on the forum, but we're on those platforms. If you do use us on those platforms, make sure you're liking, subscribing, telling your friends and family about it, and really helping us grow the podcast bigger and bigger. We're the only podcast out there that talks about this stuff. We don't do this for clout. We don't do this to, boost our Instagram. We don't do this for any of those reasons. We're literally the only bodybuilding podcast based off a forum and that's basically our home. So we're not basically just one of these guys that starts up a YouTube channel and starts doing
Yeah.
clickbait to get a bunch of likes and subscribers. We don't have no reason to do clickbait. We're trying to educate people and we're trying to get you the best body possible. So definitely hit it and make sure that you are dropping us a review. Make sure you're dropping us some comments. Get the algorithms picking up the podcast so we can keep this podcast going. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to keep it going. So let's get into it right away, Mobster. Let's start with you. This is your topic. You're a pro on this topic.
Yeah.
Does training need to be complicated?
Right. So I'm old school, and to some degree, I suspect Stevesmi is a little bit more modern, but is relatively old school. And these kind of shows are inspired by, to some degree, one of the things that's inspired at Steve is become perhaps clickbaitable, science-based training versus old school training, and a couple of other examples which I'll give later in the show. So let me address what science-based training is supposed to mean. What it's supposed to mean is that the person that's giving you an example of what they call science-based training has gone away, seen a study, literally, arguably looks at an anatomy, looks at the physiology, and even muscle fiber type, etc., 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 and then apparently comes up with a training protocol. And the training protocol is quote, quote, science based because of X, Y, and Z that I've just mentioned. And unfortunately, the persons in question rarely look, almost never, but rarely look like someone that's got any recognizable degree of muscle tissue. Now, there might be an argument, just to be generous, where they started off super skinny and they've actually added quite a bit of tissue to their frame just to get to where they are. But they're rarely freaky and so on and so forth. Um, the example that we're going to give later on in the show really goes into, as I will say, to be kind, it's a possible example of overthinking, but I suspect it really, really is overthinking. And I have the pleasure of having a huge amount of experience in terms of just time in the gym. I have gone back and looked at some of the studies and some of the training protocols that we're going to touch upon, just by way of examples again through the show, and seen that there might be a little bit of value to it, etc., etc. But the problem is thus, and you and I can do this with the forums as often as not. We know, for example, Steve, that the guys that squat, deadlift, press, do pull-ups normally are bigger and stronger. We know 100%, because we talk about trainer logs a lot of the time, that those that post up their food and their diets and listen to the advice that they are sometimes required to get have the greatest success, literally because they eat better and so on and so forth. So there's sometimes an element of overthinking. There's sometimes an element of just not working hard. There's sometimes an element of undereating and so on and so forth. So it can be fun just from a purely kind of guys going over the training, which we're kind of doing a little bit of today with this podcast, having a back and forth, discussing elements of protocols, discussing the science from time to time. But the reality of the situation is, for the most part, more muscle has been built on the heavy duty basics, the big compound exercises, than the isolation exercises. Most people, because not everybody wants to aspire to become Mr. Olympia. Most people don't train that hard, including those that would like to generate a good degree of muscle. And sometimes you can get lost, arguably, in the complicated formula and science based training and literally miss out on what I would call the basics of and the fundamentals of training. So the bottom line is, does training need to be complicated? And the short answer is no, it does not. There are memes on the social media, Instagram and Facebook, Steve, which says lift weight up, put weight down again, repeat, row muscle. And arguably, there's a lot of science about literally how myostatin works and how muscle fibers are built. Do they get broken down? Do they thicken? Muscle fiber types and so on and so forth. But really, the root of weight training, bodybuilding, weightlifting, strongman training, whatever, is pick heavy weight up, put weight down, repeat. It's just a question of how many times. I've seen clickbait titles recently where science-based trainers, people with qualifications and degrees in sports science, have argued the rep ranges. You shouldn't be doing 12 rep sets. You should be doing, and then of course you go and watch the video to see what they've got to say. Again, the argument is somewhat negated by the previous thousands of years that men and women have resisted or used some sort of resistance to build strength. Even if you just said the last 100 years or so, physical culture, Steve, weightlifting, bodybuilding, and specifically bodybuilding, early 1900, the first competition, arguably, with Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes author, Eugene Sandow, arguably the first technical bodybuilding competition. So if we say bodybuilding started then till now, why didn't we require quite the science-based stuff that people think we need to? And yet in that time, in the last 100 or so years, millions of pounds, millions of inches of muscle have been added to people's arms, to chest, to back, and so on and so forth. And that's when we didn't understand the science. So look, complicated science stuff is fun. There can be a little bit of a process in there. And perhaps it's also, and I did think of this just before the show started, Steve, that some people that train almost need this hook to hang their mental hat on in order for them to sort of enjoy their training. So they get so much into the science, so much into the bits and pieces, the tiny details of training, and that's how their psyche works, versus the freaks that can just cough shit and have a wank, Steve, and put our half inch on her arms, and you go, what the fuck? And not even understand the process at all. And then everybody else that falls in between and just says, listen, Steve, I'd like a better chest. I want a stronger bench press. I want to beat my buddies on bench press. I want a quarter of an inch on my arm so I can get myself a girl. And that arguably, Steve, is the majority of people. And they might have a bit of fun, like we're going to do on the show, discussing this back and forth, saying whether it's required, etc., etc. I'm going to say, even as a guy that understands the science, even as a person, Steve's got 20 plus 30 years experience. I've got 45 years experience of lifting. I've got reference material here in this building where I live that goes back to 1900. I've literally just bought a book a couple of weeks ago, Steve, that talks about the Greeks and the Romans and various other ancient civilizations being into physical culture and the idea of exercise. And there are examples of what looks like someone curling a dumbbell in Egyptian hieroglyphics on the side of an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb. So we're talking about thousands of years. So it doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be so science based that you're almost missing the point of why you went to the gym and what you need to do in the gym. So what do you think about whether or not it needs to be complicated, Steve, before we move on?
Yeah, and you bring up some really good points on that. I think a big reason why you see a lot of these fitness influencers who want to come up with these new weight training theories. They'll come up with any theory, whether it be on diet, whether it be on steroids, whether it be on whatever, and they'll put something out there to really draw in, it's a clickbait thing. So what ends up happening is there's only so far you can go with that until people call, people end up seeing through your bullshit. So they'll end
Yes.
up turning their channels into a gossip channel, news, prank
Yep.
channels, troll
Yep.
channels, and we see this even with former professional bodybuilders. One guy, he's got a tat on his face. I'm not even going to mention his name. He's a real piece of work. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But this guy, all he does is gossip and put people down, and he's negative and all this stuff because he doesn't have anything to share. Because
No.
there's literally nothing new to share. There is no secret sauce
No.
to
No.
this.
No.
Okay.
No.
So what happens is the main changes we've seen from 25 or 50 or 100 years ago from the Eugene Sandow days is the
Yep.
sheer amount of improvements we've had with equipment, access to gyms. You got to remember back in the 70s, unless you were near a big city, Chicago, New York, LA, you didn't have access to a gym. Miami probably didn't even have a gym in the 70s. Miami maybe had
Let me give you
one
an
gym.
example of what. Let me give you one example, Steve, of what you're referring to. You go back to the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. An incline bench was a plank of wood leaning up against the wall with a piece of wood on the floor to stop it moving. And if you were lucky, it had a pad on it, and that was an incline bench. It didn't have a seat. There was no, that was it. Uh, gyms, as Steve said, existed perhaps like the ones that we would vaguely recognize as being a modern gym in only in the major cities and especially Los
Yeah.
Angeles and
When I
California.
was
There was nothing else.
when I was growing up, the first gym in my town, I was about I'd say 12 or 13 years old, and it was a shitty gym. It was like a shitty civic center gym. It was like they didn't even have a lot of free weights. They had some dumbbells, but the only thing they had close to anything decent was they had a hammer strength chest machine, which I wore out. I love that thing, but they didn't have much at all. It was a small room. There was a basketball court. Most people went there just to play basketball, and then they had a room for cardio with a bunch of treadmills and different equipment like that. But the access to the gyms we have today is incredible. The access to have the advanced nutrition, the
Yes,
supplementation. We
yes,
have more people today. So more people, you're going to have more better athletes that are going to come because
yep,
it's a statistical thing. If
yep.
1% of people are gifted athletes and you've got 1 billion people on
Billion
earth
people on the planet, they're
and
only going to
now
have
you have
800,000.
now
Yep,
you have 6 or 7 billion people on the planet. So now you're gonna have 6 or 7 times plus in a lot of these countries around the world, like in the Middle East, they're coming on strong. I mean, some of these countries are becoming really modern, like
yep,
Dubai, which is a city in the UAE. It's become one of the meccas for bodybuilding now, and that wasn't the case before. So now you're seeing a lot of bodybuilders come out of there. Egypt, you're seeing bodybuilders come out of Brazil. It's becoming a more
yes.
modern
South America,
country.
especially,
Yeah,
yes.
you're seeing a lot of bodybuilders. So now you have a lot more people. The competition is stiffer, and of course you're going to see improvements. But really, as you said, Monster, has anything really changed? People are still,
No,
like you said, our
yeah,
ancestors used to go and hunt for an animal, chase it down, shoot it with an arrow, whatever, throw a rock at it, kill it,
yep,
whatever, and then have to carry it back to the cave. It's the same shit. They had to carry it for miles back to their cave or back to their shelter and then have to process it and then have to cook it to eat it, or they'd eat it
yep.
raw. So nothing's really changed over time. It's just that
Let me
we've
give you
become
another example, and this is just for the benefit of the listeners. So, people have been training again thousands of years, but if we just say from the 1900s onwards, 1950 in the UK, in Europe, and in America, people were training much the same with similar systems and protocols to what we do now, but it didn't have a name. It didn't have, oh, this is what my buddy showed me, it's 5 sets of 5. They didn't think to call it that. They just said, oh, if you do this and you do this, you'll get stronger. Joe Weider, when he came along with his magazines, late 40s, early 50s, took these protocols that already existed that he'd read about, spoke to coaches, asked bodybuilders how they train, and gave them a name. Super concentration, triplex, blah, blah, blah. whatever. He came up with these titles, which made for a sexy, what we call a clickbait headline now, in his magazine. And of course, he had the advantage of then being able to send that message. He'd read Joe's training. He named Joe's training in his magazine, the Weeder Triaplex Mega 2000 workout. That well, then the magazine sold all over the fucking world, Steve. And he was able to influence. At one point, I believe his Muscle and Fitness magazine was in 10 different countries, half a dozen languages, something like 5 million total circulation around the world. And most bodybuilder magazines back in the day were read by 5 people, which meant arguably you could say that he had as many as 25 million people reading the latest issue of the Mega 2000 Triplex, yada, 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 that he just named and sort of written down for people to identify. And yet that thing that he'd identified and named had already been done for 20 years. He just sort of wrote it down and educated people and spread the word of this idea. And especially if it had been proven to be successful for someone that had built a fantastic chest or huge arms or whatever. So this is arguably what happens. I'm reminded of Trains, Planes and Automobiles, Steve, and there's almost a joke in there with John Candy and is it Steve Martin in the car? And one of them's clutching the briefcase to their chest. And they're having a conversation, and it's all a bit, if you remember the movie, kind of funny as to whether one of them is supposed to be a psychopath or something like that. And he says, "What's in the briefcase? What's in the briefcase?" And he says, "Have you seen those late night infomercials?" And so the other character says, "Yes." He says, "Have you seen the advert for the 7-minute ab workout?" And he goes, "Yeah, oh, of course," he says. He says, "I've done something different." So he says, well, just by way of making conversation. Yeah.
Wrong.
What do you mean? What do you mean? He says, "I've come up with a 6-minute. The 6-minute advert,
yeah.
The 6-minute
wrong
advert.
Movie though. That wasn't
Is it
John.
not that one?
No,
Well,
no, that was There's Something About Mary.
okay.
Ben Stiller, yeah.
That's
Those,
my old boomer brain not remembering the movie.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
point is, he's literally knocked a minute off it, and he's
yeah.
somehow convinced that he's reinvented an ab workout by taking it from 7 minutes to 6 minutes. So
Yeah, that's a
clickbait.
funny line.
It,
That's a funny line. Yeah.
yeah, even the whole. It's funny because of course we lift weights. We know it's a bit silly. It's all about doing the goddamn workout, and whether it takes 7 minutes or 6 minutes shouldn't make that
Yeah.
much of a difference.
And
But he's so impassioned with the idea that he's somehow come up with something new. So here's the thing. I don't, for the most part, I was about to say, I don't care if you think you've come up with something new. I could probably go back and find an example of someone doing that 50 years ago. So what you should
yeah,
really be doing, here's another thing as well, and this applies to the general population, and arguably perhaps not our demographic, our listening audience. For the most part, we look for, as human beings, a technological or a way of doing something easier, whether that's using a tool as cavemen, a stick, a stone, an axe, a spear, a knife, as opposed to just our bare hands. And as human beings in the 21st century, technology, iPhones, apps, and so on and so forth that do our thinking for us, AI, etc., doing our thinking for us. So we are creative, but most of the part, our creativity when it comes to technology is about getting more done in the same amount of time or making life easy for ourselves. The reality of lifting in a gym, bodybuilding, strongman, etc., is that you need to train your fucking ass off. You will make more progress. You will have bigger arms, bigger chest, better bench press, flatter stomach. You will be more ripped, etc., if you train your ass off. And that's really difficult to comprehend for some people. We're looking for that edge, that advantage, the idea of a new workout, etc. And so you need almost to get into the like in the grind. Understand that the brief period of time that you're in the gym, an hour, 2, 3, 4 times a week, at 1 hour per day, 4 days a week, in actual time with your muscles under tension, being strained, is arguably 60 to 75 seconds, maybe 90 seconds every time you do a set. So if you did 10 sets, that's 900 seconds. If you did 3 exercises, it's only 2,700 seconds of your whole fucking day, 4 times a week, for the various body parts that you're doing. It's momentary. It's very brief period of time, but it needs to be almost nasty and uncomfortable because your body is very used to being comfortable. And you can science the fuck out of it. You can use a training program that's been created. You can find a exercise scientist to back up your idea, etc., etc. But if you're not getting in the gym and grinding and sweating your ass off, I'll use Steve as an example. You would, and I'll bring you in for this one, Steve. The time when you made the greatest progress, with or without PEDs, what was that training like for you when you did that?
Man, yeah, I think I was going 4 or 5 times a week. That was when I was, and then to add to the last segment before we move on to how structure workout on our cycle, we got to throw in anabolic steroids today versus 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. The anabolic steroids, the access to these amazing compounds that we have access
Yep.
to from Geneza Pharma have
Yes.
really taken things to the next level. And let's be honest, even at some of these other competitions, I've seen guys. I was at a high school weightlifting competition, and I saw some dudes doing some incredible weight. These are 17, 18-year olds doing some
Yeah.
incredible weight.
Yeah.
And obviously, some of these guys are juicing. Some of them. I don't know how many, but I would venture a good percentage are juicing. And that's the reality of it. Not, and I don't agree with 17 or 18-year-old juicing.
No, me neither. No.
I think you should be at least 25, 21 absolute minimum, but
Yes.
that's the reality of it. And the accessibility
Oh,
of these
please.
compounds with a click of the mouse. Back in your
Never
day,
been as great it is now. The variety via Geneza has never been as great
yeah,
as it is now. And the prices
yeah,
arguably have never
yeah.
been as good on a dollar for
Oh,
dollar
yeah.
basis as they have now.
I, at 17, 18, I would not have been able to afford steroids even if
No,
I wanted them.
price no.
And I wouldn't have access to them even if I wanted them. But now the kids have access to them. They just go online, pay with Bitcoin, boom, they get it. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so easy now to access these compounds. So let's be honest with ourselves. The access to what we have access to today is incredible. In the 70s, they had access to three, four, maybe five different steroids.
Yes.
That's it. Now you have
No
access.
AIs, no AIs, Steve.
Yep.
No fat burning type products.
Yeah.
No
If you
clean,
fucked up,
no
you
whatever.
fucked up. Now, if you fuck up, you can take something
Yeah.
to correct your fuck up. Your
No
coach can put you.
SARMs, no peptides, growth hormone just starting to come in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah. And that was even
No,
harder to get back then. Now, growth
oh,
hormone
please, yeah.
is affordable.
Yes,
Even into the 90s, you'd have to pay off someone who was an HIV/AIDS patient a
yes.
thousand bucks or $1,500 for a
Yeah.
kit. Now you can go on Geneza Pharma and you can buy a kit for like $200-300 for one
Yeah.
of their
I
HGH
used
patients.
an example on another show, Steve. I said that when I looked at it, late 80s, $500 got you a month's supply. $500 now would buy me 3 or 4 months supply. So in real terms, the price has come down. Accessibility is fantastic. Quality of product, not being faked, is fantastic. And again, we can find more information. You literally had to go and speak to someone. Let's say you live in the States. You literally had to find someone who could get you a source. In the 80s, starting to go online, but you had to find someone that could get you genuine source, arguably from a hospital, or as you say, from an HIV patient, they could selling off their surplus. I can go on now and one click and buy. I've seen the price as low as $120 for a month's supply, Steve. And I would say that arguably that's about the right place for most products now. $500 would definitely get me minimum 3 months supply, I think, and that's anywhere from any source, including Geneza. You want companies like that. I'm just looking on their site, Steve. Domestic, international, orals, injectables, human growth hormone, anti-estrogens, AI, post-cycle therapy products, erectile dysfunction trial packs, and erectile dysfunction and those are just that's just their category list. Back in the day, like Steve said, we've talked about the golden age with Arnold, etc. 3, 4, 5 different forms of testosterone. If you were lucky, no AI, no access to peptides, very little access to growth hormone, if at all. Um, no clinics, no TRT, no information, and the prices, honestly, $1,000, like
Yeah.
Steve
And
said,
we're going to
went down
talk.
to $500, $120 a vial, Steve, of testosterone. Crying
Yeah.
out loud.
Yep. So let me
Let's
answer
talk
your
about
Yeah.
structuring.
So
Yeah,
let me answer your question. So back when I was making my biggest gains in my late 20s in
Yes,
terms of
yes,
strength
yes.
and size. I was training 4 to 5 times a week. I was going about 70 minutes per session. What I would do is I get up in the morning, eat a meal, go work out, come home, eat another meal, and then the key was I would sleep. So what this ties into the topic title, are you overthinking things? A lot of times the biggest mistake people make is they're not getting enough sleep. And that nap that I took
Yep,
before work, that 1 hour, 2 hour nap went
yep.
a long way, especially after a workout. That's what you want after a workout. Obviously, you want proper nutrition. That's obvious. We don't have to explain that.
Steve,
Most
I'm talking about, did you train your fucking ass off and was you driven to do your absolute damnedest to get as big and as muscular as possible? That's what I really
So
want.
I trained my balls on, but I still did it under control.
Yes,
I was structuring my workouts where I had some really good guys in the gym who were in their
yes.
40s,
The mentors.
50s,
Yes, yes,
who
yes, yes.
were really, showing me the grind as someone in his late 20s. And one of the advices they gave me is build consistency at a lower weight. You want to increase the weight, but you also want to build consistency. So if I was upping the weight and then I kind of hit a plateau, I would drop back down to 70, even 60% for a week or two. And then I would begin my ascent back up. And then that's how you get stronger. So it's not going to be a linear fashion. And that's one of the things I learned. And a lot of you are going to learn that in life. It's just like your if you invest in the stock market, it's not going to go up every single day where your portfolio is
No,
going to keep rising. It's going to be ups and downs. And if you're not willing to accept those ups and downs, that's okay. Put your money in a money market or in a CD, and this way it would gradually increase slowly that way. It'd be a fixed rate. So, and a lot of times, that may work as a financial strategy. It may not because we don't know what's going to happen. But my point is, weight training is the same way. You're not going to improve in a linear fashion. So you have to accept that. And if you
yep.
overthink things, we say so many people, I have clients that come to me like, Steve, I'm on this diet protocol or I'm on this weight training protocol and I had a day where I went to the gym and I didn't get stronger or I weighed myself one day and I gained half a pound. What's going on?
Yeah.
They're
Well, I
panicked.
only put on 6 pounds in the last cycle. I thought I was going to
I
put
mean,
on 20 pounds.
I explain to them it's not, don't worry about where you're going day to day or even week to week. Worry about where you're going month to month. Worry about going where you're going year to year. That's what you
Yes.
want to pay attention to. And that's because we're not going to improve in a linear fashion. It's
No.
impossible to do that. That's just not the way the body works. So there's going to be setbacks. What happens if you go to the gym and you've got a little flu or a little cold that you're working
Yeah.
through? Your body's going to be weaker. Your immune system is going to be weaker. But at
Life
the
gets in the way, Steve. Work gets in the
but
way.
you go to the gym, of course you're going to be weaker that day, and a lot of times you don't even know you have a viral infection. Maybe you don't have
Yep.
symptoms of a viral infection. Maybe you have a little bit of a sniffle, but you don't think much of it, or maybe a little bit of a fever, but you don't think much of it. But you go to the gym and you struggle, you have a bad day. Are you going to go in a panic mode? Are you going to overthink it and be like, "Oh my God, I'm doing something wrong. Let me change up everything." No, that's the way our bodies work. And throughout history, with every single animal on earth, it's the same thing. A cat, a stray cat who hunts. They hunt, for several hours a night. They try to hunt mice in your neighborhood. That stray cat. It might have a night where it doesn't get a stray cat, a mouse. Shit happens. They have a bad night. Maybe they missed the mouse. They had five mouses that they missed, five mice that they missed, and they're like, do they freak out and panic? Oh my God, I'm doing something wrong. I gotta change my hunting strategy. No, they gotta stick to what they're doing. And it may not work that night, but the next night it may work. So you've got to just stick to your game plan, have a good split routine. And that's what you got to do. And accept not overthinking the fact that, oh, I'm not going to improve day to day and I'm not going to, keep losing weight because shit happens, like Monster said.
Even top professional athletes, before we move on, Steve, cannot peak all year round, cannot be consistently improving all year round. So they will, and I've talked about this on other shows, strength and conditioning coaches will have athletes on a American football team peak for the big games, peak for the games that matter. And they will rotate their athletes so that there's someone on the team on the day of play, regardless of where you are in the season, that is at a peak level of performance. And this won't be every single player. It will be 3 or 4 players that can make the plays get the goals, win the game, but then have perhaps a star athlete not play that day, or just have them only play for a few minutes and then keep them on the bench. No one is consistently improving all the time. So let me talk about structuring. Understanding consistency is probably number one, Steve. Going to the gym, not missing workouts, and having those little bits of success again and again and again for long periods of time, like Steve said, weeks and months and years, is how you end up to being the big, strong, muscular motherfucker that you want to be. Young people, perhaps, younger listeners, 18, 19, 20, might want to be the next Mr. Whatever as quickly as possible. And if they're the freaks of nature, maybe, like that 17-year-old example that Steve said earlier on, maybe they'll get there quicker. But the majority of us will make small gains over long periods of time. So being consistent, trying not to, as best you can, with life and everything else, to get as many of those sessions in on a consistent, regular basis will help you, number one. Number two, Steve talks about doing pull-ups and dips and what we've called the big compound exercises. You should have, and I will argue this point with anybody, some big fucking compound exercises in your workout routine, whether it's arms or chest or back or legs or whatever. If you haven't got a medical dispensation with no injuries, no ongoing niggles and aches and strains, no note from your mother or your doctor, then you need to be doing stuff like pull-ups that Steve likes or dips. You need to occasionally be doing some sort of bench press, pushing movement. You need to be pushing a weight overhead, pressing, dumbbell, machine, whatever. You need to be picking shit up off the floor, deadlift. You certainly need to be doing squats and to a lesser degree, leg press and so on and so forth. Now, whether you isolate by pre-exhaust and then go to a compound, or whether you start with the compound, the big exercises I've just mentioned, and then go into isolation as a way of developing those small show muscles and so on and so forth, I'd still want you to have a compound in there somewhere. Examples again. And this is perhaps arguably, Steve, with regards to overcomplication. I have been guilty, and I'm sure Steve has in the past, of reading something or thinking of adding something. I want to develop the outer head of my tricep, so therefore I'm going to do X exercise, and adding that to my routine instead of substituting an exercise in my routine. So I will see from time to time, and I talk about these on the forums when I see them, people that are not professionals or genetic freaks doing 30 sets of workout, when we've even talked about a genetic freak who was a professional on the forum, Steve, the late Monstro, Marco Louis, who would only do 25 sets of workouts. Here's a guy that was on 5 grams a week, ready for a show, and more, and peptides, and growth hormone, doing less sets than a guy with a little bit of muscle, with a nice little bit of shape, who wasn't a genetic freak, and is using a lot less than 5 grams a week, and no peptides, and perhaps a little bit of growth hormone. So why is he doing 30 sets versus the professional with the genetics? Doesn't make sense. Sometimes what we see, as I've just said, you're adding exercises when you should be substituting. I've talked to some of the guys on the forum and says, why don't you have an A and a B workout? So you can do 3 exercises for your tricep, for example, in your A workout, and then a week later do your B tricep exercise workout, and then a week later do your A, and so on. And in that way, you're doing 6 exercises for your triceps over 2 workouts instead of 6 exercises with three sets, 18 sets just for triceps, and so on. So make sure that you're not adding to your workout. Make sure that the routine is structured in that particular way. Being consistent with food, and for that argument, Steve, even your PEDs, is super important. We've talked about this when we've talked about logs. The ones that have the greatest success in getting muscular, into shape, getting lean, and competing or hitting a challenge are the ones with great food and so on and so forth. By all means, come on the forums and let's have a look at what you're doing. And if we can strip away the bullshit and get you back on point, this is what you want. Right. So the topic, the thread that inspired this whole podcast that we're doing today was one called, Steve, and we've mentioned it at the beginning, Had an Idea Halo, which you can find on the Elite Fitness. And we're going to link this into the links below if you're able to see that on the version of the podcast you're listening to. in the thread, a former obese, he'd been 320 pounds, Steve, dieted down to 250, was doing strongman training. And I suspect his thought process that kind of led him down what I thought was a little bit of a cul-de-sac, a sort of mental blocks off alleyway, and he needed to come out of there and get back to keeping it simple and keeping it structured, etc. So the thought process in question was he was thinking that a microdosing halo testing, so very small amounts, Steve, might, and these are the words I believe he used, was reinforcing the neural pathway, which will give a greater signal using halo between the brain and the muscle in order for me, therefore, to get more from my workout. And I went back with him and I said, look, halo testing is a fantastic drug for powerlifters. It's used low dosages occasionally for bodybuilders. It is one of those ones that might increase your aggression and might increase your power temporarily, specifically for training. Powerlifters have used it notoriously at higher dosages for very short periods of time, and especially pre-competition, strongman and powerlifting type competitions where peak strength is required. And on those days, there are various protocols that have been suggested, but typically someone that's perhaps a 100 kilogram, 220-pound athlete who wants to bench their best bench press or their best squat or whatever else might, for the day, use 100 milligrams and sort of come into the platform, come on, I'm going to smash the fuck out of shit, and get under that and maybe add 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds to their PRs for their bench, their squat, their deadlift, whatever. But the idea of using a small dose, 5, 10 milligrams, every single day to somehow influence the brain to enhance the signal from the brain to the muscle, from down the spinal column, Steve, out to, say, for example, your legs for squats, to somehow get a better contraction from it, to me was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I think, arguably, in his example, and I did have a bit of back and forth, so please go on that thread and check it out. In regard to it, I said, one, you're not really, doesn't make any sense because otherwise athletes would have done this before you. Halo's been around 50, 60 years, arguably, with accessibility certainly last 40, 50 years. Why haven't we seen people microdosing Halo? I've talked to and have actually worked with people that do stroke rehab, which is about rewiring or relearning or reinforcing a different neural pathway to get a muscle, a hand, a joint, a knee, a leg to work again like it used to pre-stroke. I'm familiar with the training protocols of top Olympic weightlifters using what's called sub-maximal, so 90, 95% of your one rep max for the clean and jerk or the snatch, repeatedly 20, 30, 40 times, Steve, over a 3 or 4 hour workout, so that when they get on the platform at the Olympics or a high level weightlifting competition, adding 5 or 10% to their old record, perhaps even arguably, Steve, an Olympic record, is almost second nature because they've been under that load or very close to that load multiple times. And like a ballet dancer or a chess grandmaster or something, the thought process has almost become automated. We've done this thing so many times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times, that the neural pathway, the signal from your brain to the working muscles is required in those top athletes, the top grandmasters, the top ballet dancer, whoever, a learned skill has almost become automatic because the pathway, the signal is so strong. And because you've repeated the behavior, you know where your hand should be, where your foot should be, and so on and so forth for that lift, for that event, for playing chess. You're thinking chess 3 moves ahead when the other players might be 1 move ahead. With a mechanic, knowing precisely how an engine works and where this part is on an engine because they've been a mechanic for 20 years or whatever. None of them required microdosing halo testing in order to enhance that. So I said, look, what we do when it comes to exercise science is this. We understand more about how a process works, but what we're not doing, arguably, is reinventing the actual process. So I said to him, you need perhaps, you've done fantastically well to lose the weight that you've done. You're doing fantastically well right now as a strength athlete is looking to compete or already competing in strongman. Don't try to outthink yourself, overcomplicate yourself, outscience yourself. You dropped from 320 to 250 because you ate less crap and you did more. you might have used the PED to make that happen. It's come onto the forums more recently. You are competing, I believe, already with amateur strongman to a decent level. The numbers he's put up, Steve, are quite good. But how did he get good at that point? Will he arguably enhance himself that much more by reinforcing the neural pathway? I don't think so. He might learn how to do a movement, or will Halo help him learn? I said, I would actually argue he got more chance as an athlete of enhancing the neural pathway with magic mushrooms or peptides that stimulate the brain than you are with a drug that's well known, well used, well experienced, and so on and so forth, going back arguably 50 years in terms of the training. So it was interesting to have the back and forth with him. I tried not to be too preachy and too negative. I did appreciate that he was arguably maybe trying to think outside the box. But in this particular set of circumstances, it's like reinventing the wheel. And we use that analogy because the wheel works. There isn't something else that works better because you've invented it. All you can do is make it more friction free, more perfectly round. You cannot reinvent the wheel. You can't you can't out science something that was already working. All you can do is arguably understand the process that's involved. So, for example, just to finish on this point before I bring Steve back in, we still don't completely understand. We do understand it more than we ever have done, but we still don't completely understand every single aspect of the muscle building in bodybuilding process. It should be train hard, eat well, rest well, as Steve said, add PEDs from Geneza, enhance that process, get bigger, get more muscular. But we're still slightly confused by myostatin inhibition. We're still slightly confused by the physical nature. Is it, if we take amino acids at this time, is it more important than if we take it whenever? And so on and so forth. And there's so many variables in the process that you arguably cannot completely understand the process in every single individual. And of course, that's without getting into the genetics of person A versus person B versus person C. So you almost need to understand yourself and your ability to drive yourself hard in the gym and be consistent with your diet and being consistent with your training and being patient more than you need to science the fuck out of it. And arguably, as is in this example, microdose halo testing to enhance the signal from your brain to your muscle. So what do you think about the halo thread, Stephen, the possibility of him overthinking in this example before we move on?
Yeah, and I see this a lot more coming on the forum. I see people. There's another guy too. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. I think his name was SS Fitness. Um, and he also has these really interesting theories where he is just some interesting views. And I think a lot of times, you know, I completely get where you're coming from because sometimes someone like Mobster is going to get really frustrated because Mobster's been weight training, say, you know, for 50 years, over 50 years, and you know he's seen it all, and it's almost like a veteran safety in the NFL. You've already seen every fucking coverage. You know every fucking defense. You know the defense better
Yeah.
than the coach. And then
Yes.
they fired all the coaches and they bring in new coaches and they bring in some 28-year-old guy with glasses who never played football,
Yeah.
who's the coach's grandson, some coach, legendary coach's grandson. It's nepotism. It's a nepotism example. We've seen this in the NFL. Like Don Shula, his kids and his grandkids are coaches, and they're not good coaches, but they get jobs because of the name and because it's
Yeah.
nepotism, and it's a good old boys club. So don't the 35-year-old safety, he's been in the league for 13, 14 years, and he knows more than the coach. And then this coach, you know, who's the grandson of some legendary coach, comes in, and Bill Belichick too. He got his sons coaching jobs too. His coach, and they were
Mm.
horrible. They didn't even know. Like literally, one of his sons came in and literally just told the team in a meeting, told the players, like, look, I've never coached safeties before, so bear with me on this. But my daddy got me this job, so and it's got to be
At least it's
frustrating.
honest.
So Mobster's got to be frustrated, and I get the same frustration when it comes to nutrition. I get people all the time who want to
God, how many times, Steve, have you had to prove what you've said, science based, and give
yeah.
examples when people have questioned
Well, because
fasting?
yeah, I mean, look, and at the end of the day, a lot of times though, these wacky ideas and theories that people come up with will work. It's a placebo effect, or it just
Yes.
happens to work. Dartboard dieting. So many bodybuilders, so many of these fitness influencers do dartboard dieting where they just eat, they magically come up with macros and calories and all this stuff, and they come up with something, and it works for them. Any diet would work for them. They could eat McDonald's every fucking day, and it would probably still work for them. So they just get lucky. It's called dartboard dieting, or if it fits your macros,
Let me give
whatever.
you an example which
So,
allows us to segue into the next one because we're going to talk about
yeah.
using Geneza
But
product.
my
This actually
point
came up
is,
the other day, Steve. Yeah.
if you actually did it the right way, you would optimize your results and not
Yeah.
worried about this overthinking stuff. But at the end of the day, it's fun. It's still fun to think about it. And these new theories. And look again, if you have these theories, come on the forum. We're not gonna be negative.
No,
We're
no,
not gonna
no,
preach.
because we might actually
Yeah.
learn something new. We might
Yep.
understand something better than
Yeah.
before.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
look, let me
But
give
go
you an
ahead. Yeah.
example, Steve. And this allows us to segue into using Geneza products, cycles, stacks, and so on. So this is an example I saw the other day, and they said Diana Bowl doesn't give you permanent gains, and I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" I didn't actually respond that way. In my head, I thought that way. So here's an example, and I'll get Steve to talk about Geneza Dynamo for this reason. More muscle has been built, especially the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s on Dynamo than any steroid at that time that was available. Metal test was available. And later on, other products were available, but there was more fundamental muscle on 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s bodybuilders made with permanent muscle gains, it has to be said, Dynabol, than the idea that somehow it's all water and the moment you stop taking a Dynabol, you lose it. Complete and utter rubbish. Steve and I have talked about the very first cycles we've done. And I said my first probably 5 or 6 cycles, but I can remember specifically the first two. I would add arguably some water, Steve, of course, £10 gain on cycle using 30 to 50 milligrams a day of a product like Geneza's Dynabol and retain, on average, 5 to 6 pounds of muscle tissue with each of those first 2 cycles. So in the first 2 cycles, Steve, I went up 20 pounds, but I retained 12 pounds. So the idea that, and I quote, the gains from Dynabol were temporary, I'm like, do you mean the millions of examples of people that have used Dynabol, quote unquote, the breakfast of champions, and gained those weights that I gained, or similar, or proportionate to themselves, £6 instead of £10, and kept £4 instead of £6, or £4, whatever, as opposed to what I gained, makes no sense whatsoever. You up. There is enough. There, all steroids work for some people some of the time, and over the period of time, the idea that you can't gain and keep some muscle from Dynabol made no sense to me whatsoever. So it's a great example, and I'll start with this. Geneza have a GP Methan, which is their version of Dynabol. I would use this 30 to 50 milligrams a day, and how I did it back in the day would be 8 weeks. Arguably now, Steve, 4 to 8 weeks. Depends what your gains are. I would look for some kind of A to make sure that I didn't gain too much water, and I would tweak my training and tweak my diet to keep as much of the weight that I gained on Dynamo. So just give the listeners as an example, Steve, basic oral application before we talk about injectables using Geneza products that you know has built muscle on you or people we talk about and kept muscle before we move on to injectables.
Yeah, and there's several good options, especially if you're looking to increase your volume or try new workouts or trying to get stronger. Some of my favorite options from Geneza Pharma is going to be when it comes to orals, they're Anavar, they're Turinabol. Those are great options. They're mild steroids. They get a lot of benefits. Mobster talking about Dianabol. Anadrol would be another one. I like it more than Dianabol. It's a DHT derivative, but it also adds a lot of size and strength very quickly. And then one, if
I've
you want,
broken multiple, sorry, Steve, I've broken multiple records and won several competitions just doing 50 milligrams a day
yep,
of Anavar for 8 weeks. Multiple
yep.
records, multiple championship competitions.
And then super droll, really, really toxic. Stick to a low dose, 10 to 20 milligrams max per day. But if you're in a rush, you want to do something in 3, 4 weeks, you really want to get stronger, you really want to get more hard, and you're willing to deal with the side effects, then Superdrol would also be a good option for Geneza Pharma. Some of my favorite injectables that would really take your workouts to the next level. Trenbolone, obviously, this is something for
Yes.
more advanced. So you want to stick to some of the more mild steroids first. About Trenbolone, I've always used it. The most I've used Trenbolone 400 milligrams a week, which is more than enough. I really like it more at 250. That allows you to keep the side effects under control. Nice thing about Geneza is they have options. They have the acetate or the enanthate. So you can go with acetate if it's your first time using it. It'll be in and out of your system quicker. Equipoise is a good mild option. It's going to work in almost any situation, whether you're looking for endurance, bulking, cutting, recomp, you can do it. And of course, testosterone. They have many testosterone options from top to bottom, no matter what ester you're looking for. And it's pretty damn smooth stuff. I'm sensitive to post injection pain, so I don't want to deal with PIP. So their products, their injectables are very, very good. Why don't you touch on DECA, NPP, and Sustanon a little bit, and also
Yeah,
Proviron. I know you're a big fan of Proviron.
I am now, Stephen. I wasn't, and that's actually arguably learning something new and talking to Steve on this podcast and picking up on its usefulness. So for years, I'd run multiple cycles of different orals, different injectables, and never used Proviron. And then Steve and I were required to do a show talking about how Proviron and to a lesser degree Masteron would enhance the greater uptake and use of the free testosterone in a cycle. In other words, if you added Proviron and a small amount of Masteron, or a small amount of Masteron, should I say, to your cycle, both of those, and we actually went back and looked at the science, enhanced the dosages of a perfectly normal stack that you'd already done. An example for me, Steve, would be using 25 milligrams a day of something like Geneza's Proviron on cycle to enhance the rest of the cycle. So and that means I could keep the dosages as they were previously and still get more out of that stack, still get more out of that cycle. And just by way of example, Steve knows, and that's the reason why he's mentioned them. I have mentioned multiple times. This is my personal preference, so you might have a different preference as a listener. But I have had the best gains in terms of bulking and or getting strong, Steve, from a combination of moderate amounts of Sustanon, GP do a Sus 270, and DECA. As Steve said, as MPP with for other users, I'm looking at the GP DECA 300 milligrams as we do this show. And a mil of each, I was about to say a milliliter, which is but a mil of each every 4 days puts me around, not including the Proviron, puts me around the 800 milligrams per week total, which is under a gram. The Proviron maybe takes me just up to, or just under, I believe, 1,000 milligrams. I have done more, I haven't had more success. On multiple, and again, this would be 8 weeks typically, Steve, for an injectable cycle. I've talked about on other shows that I would regularly, back in the day, when I wasn't trying to get bigger at the time, go from 280 to 300 pounds on cycle using that combination of Sust and DECA without the Proviron. More recently, in the last year or two, very similar cycle. I think I went slightly over 1,000 milligrams using the Sustanon and DECA. And I still wasn't using Proviron at that point. I went from a cut stack 4 weeks and I went into a bulking stack of Sust and DECA and I hit an all-time high at 336. In a minute, I'm actually a little bit lighter, a little bit leaner. That's just the way things are going in a minute. But I'm also not trying to be 350 or 400 pounds. Might have done arguably back in the day, Steve, but I'm 60 years of age, still fucking strong. Those aren't my life goals anymore. But it was useful information for the amount of watery muscle and muscle that I had put on when I wasn't trying to keep gains, and then actual muscle and actual strength in terms of weight on the bar so that I could peak strength for competitions and compete in. And I'm thinking of an example, Steve, winning the European Championships in grip that I was competing in at the time in Madrid using exactly that kind of cycle. Slightly uncomfortable being 300 pounds on the plane as it is at 6'3", but nevertheless kicking ass. I think I won 3 out of the 5 or 6 events, came second or third on the rest of the events and won the whole damn thing and got 2 world records at that particular competition. Prep like a professional athlete as well. in terms of my nutritional approach, my resting approach, my rehab approach, but especially my training approach. And these, for me, old school again. Now, one of the things I will say in terms of the science to fuck out of stuff when it comes to PED stacks and protocols is it's a fun thing to talk about. Apps are fucking loopy. We talk about it all the time, lots of these shows, but you do not need a professional level stack or combination thereof, thousands of milligrams, etc. Nearly every single show Steve and I do, unless we specifically talk about professional stacks, I would argue, Steve, that most of our stacks are a little bit under or a little bit over 1,000 milligrams a week if we take it to excess. And I would also argue, and this is again with that, you don't have to overcomplicate things, that the protocols that Steve and I discussed using Geneza products have probably put more muscle on thousands of listeners and individuals that train according to these kind of protocols or because of what we've said than 3,000, 4,000 or 5,000 milligrams a week lifting, peaking, but especially using PEDs like a professional. So what do you think about that as well, Steve, before we talk about Geneza?
Yeah, it's important. The nice thing about Geneza Pharma that you have to realize is they have everything. So you can go on their forum, I'm sorry, go on the website and you can come on our forum and check out where to get Geneza Pharma. Then you can check out their products. They have everything. They have everything you're going to need. They're one-stop shop. They not only have steroids, they have dick drugs. They have peptides, as Mobster mentioned. They have PCT products. They have ancillaries that you're going to need on cycle. So they
Yeah.
have it all. And they're going to be able to provide you with the highest quality products at a great
Yes.
price. And that's
Yes.
very, very important when you're using any of these anabolic steroids. So really, really good options, whether you want to cut, recomp, bulk, they have you covered when it comes to steroids or injectable. So let's get into Geneza Pharma a little bit. And I'll touch on this first before I let you, Mobster, finish out
Yeah.
and give your final thoughts. Look, they've been in part of our product protocols for over 15 years. Fast shipping, great prices, amazing promotions weekly. You can check out their promotions. You come on the forum, they'll post
Yes.
up their promotions. There's some promotions where it's 50% off their products.
Yes.
So you can
Yes.
really be a smart shopper and just check out the weekend and weekday promotions that
Yep.
they have and stock up on their products and save money
Buy
that way.
ahead of time, ready for your next stack. Don't wait until just before the stack and save hundreds of dollars, Steve.
They have great service. Their products are tested and they're approved. You know what you're getting when you use them. And that's very, very important for me. Mobster, spend a few minutes talking about why you
I
love
was
Geneza
thinking
Pharma.
just on Geneza, Steve, literally used by the whole spectrum athletes that do athletics, Olympic athletes, people that are looking to add a little bit of muscle, look good for the beach, top professional bodybuilders, amateur bodybuilders that are competing, average gym joes like you, the listener, that just wants to look good, fill out your shirt better, look good, better dressed down at the nightclub or whatever else, looking to improve your sport. That whatever you do, Geneza's got something for you. And like we said earlier in the show, when it comes to Geneza, the accessibility that you have now via companies like Geneza, the quality of products just by the force of business amongst the different sources has made all the sources that we refer to, including Geneza, that much better. It's forced them to be a better quality. It's forced them to have more lab tests. So you have, as the phrase that come from, I think, Winston Churchill, Steve, you've never had it, and not Winston Churchill, one of the British prime ministers, you've never had it so good, is very true when it comes to using performance enhancing products from companies like Geneza. Final thoughts on the whole, keep it simple, etc., etc. Look, guys, you can outthink in some ways certain particular things in life. You're a politician, certain aspects of business. You can sometimes out science stuff in terms of technology, but I believe when it comes to training, most athletic endeavors, but specifically because of our target audience, Steve, the weightlifters, the bodybuilders, the adding muscle, it's very, very difficult to outwork. You can overtrain, you can perhaps over diet, etc., etc. But if you're willing to put in the work, be consistent, get sweaty, understand that the lactic acid means you're not broken, it's just you training your goddamn ass off. That the muscle flexing, the muscle you can feel contracting really, really hard is a momentary thing. I don't care how brutal If you go to the gym, Steve, for an hour, hour and a half, same as everybody else, the average, and you work your fucking ass off, it's a momentary thing. It's minutes, really minutes, when you total up the actual time under load per training session. It's probably 2 hours tops in terms of time under load per week out of 120, how many 127 hours, whatever it is in a week, Steve. 2 hours is you working your goddamn ass off. And you're consistent with your knife and fork in the kitchen. You get those naps if you can. You rest when you're commuting. You rest when you're sitting on the bleachers watching your kid play baseball. Whatever it is, chilling the fuck out, relaxing, sitting on the sofa for night time after you trained your ass off in the gym. You will get bigger. You will get stronger. Try not to overthink it and overcomplicate it. Hopefully you've agreed. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Science the shit out of stuff if you want. We're willing to debate you. Come onto the forums and check us out. If you've got something you think works, that might be something we can learn, let us know. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.